It's 1776, and a ragtag group of freedom fighters met in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to tell the King of England that he could not tax them, and they would form their own government and tax themselves. Happy birthday, America! Happy 4th of July, my viewers. It is Independence Day in our semi-quincentennial year. Given the times we live in, some people are completely unenthused about it, others are very ecstatic, and a great many are probably perfectly uninterested but are very happy to have an excuse to party hard all weekend long. Which leads me to ask the age-old question, does anything ever really change? On July 4th, 1776, you could find the same groups of people in the colonies, those disgusted, those enthusiastic, and those apathetic to the Declaration. Spoiler alert, the enthusiasts eventually won the War of Independence. And welcome to the War of Independence podcast. I'm your host, M.W. Lewis. You gotta love America because her people will never, ever agree on anything. And the Declaration of Independence is a good reason why we are free to disagree. Our founding document grants us liberty and happiness, and I'm pretty sure you can't get more than two people together in one room and come to an agreement on what it means to be happy, or have liberty, for that matter, but you can find tons of people who are perfectly happy to use their liberty to argue about it. Everything I'm about to say is merely an attempt to open your mind and consider the Declaration from a different point of view than you might be used to, and that would be the point of view of the colonists in 1776. And I think it is safe to say, without providing fully checked and referenced statements today, that our conception of the Declaration has become a bit more mythological than its actual reality. And even though I'm about to discuss why, I embrace the mythology wholeheartedly, because every great nation deserves to have a mythological past. Britain had King Arthur, the Romans had Romulus and Remus, we have Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence. But what exactly was the Declaration in the context of an 18th century English colony? It was a quaint document, a piece of propaganda among many pieces. Unlike the many speeches, newspaper articles, and pamphlets expounding on liberty and independence circulating throughout the colonies before and after July 4th, 1776, the Declaration is much more important because it was written and adopted by the Continental Congress, so carried the imprimatur of the most august representative body of the colonies. Nothing new was stated in the Declaration that hadn't already been said in the aforementioned pamphlets, speeches, and newspaper articles. Yes, I said it, and I'll repeat it. Nothing new was stated in the Declaration of Independence. It and all the other pieces of propaganda directed at the final break with Britain drew heavily from the same sources, which were the Enlightenment philosophers of Britain and Europe, and none more important to some of the founding fathers than John Locke. And if anyone in America thinks Jefferson, Adams, Patrick Henry, and Thomas Paine were secretly reading Locke in their bedrooms with the curtains drawn so no official would catch them reading such subversive material, they weren't. Locke, along with Hume, Hobbes, Rousseau, and a plethora of Enlightenment thinkers, were standard reading among the educated on both sides of the Atlantic. Many aspects of these enlightened thinkers' philosophies bubble to the surface in the Declaration. What was the role of government? What was the role of a monarch? What was the role of a representative body, a parliament, or a legislature? How much sovereignty did the people under these have? These questions formed the essence of the great debate between Britain and its 13 most belligerent colonies. I'm not going to discuss the Enlightenment in this short special episode because I'm bound to misspeak about a 2-century intellectual movement which greatly contributed to the shape of the world we live in today. But I hope I'm not out of bounds by saying what I've already said. In the years following its publication, the Declaration came to uplift oppressed people in the New and even the Old World, and that is because its preamble, not the introduction nor its main body, resounds. I think it's safe to say most Americans cannot remember one word of the one-sentence introduction, which was not written in acceptable social media length. And I'd bet everything I own that no one who doesn't study American history in depth knows even one of the grievances listed after the preamble. But the preamble, oh, that preamble, how has it touched thee and me and the many? A lot of Americans can recite the critical part of this preamble by rote. All men are created equal, and they have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The many should be forgiven if they forget the entire preamble, which again is not written in a block of social media friendly text. But since it is 4th of July, I will recite the entire intro and preamble right now before turning our attention back to the point I really wanted to make today. This document was great propaganda. The unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal stations to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its power in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. That is the stuff, man. That is the secret sauce. That gets people's eyes wet, even today. But I dare say again, it was standard intellectual fare for educated Englishmen. The preamble did not drive men to arms. It is rather erudite. It's philosophical. Most regular people don't care to think about natural rights and the nature of government, neither today nor especially back then. People inherently care about pocketbook and tabletop issues and who their sons and daughters are going to marry, rather than worry about whether they had liberty and happiness. And this document, this declaration, floods the zone with pocketbook issues. The grievances which I'm going to read here in a moment were actually not newly stated either. All of them had been packaged and presented to colonists and Parliament during the run-up to independence. What is stark about this document, though, whereas colonial leaders previously pointed the finger of blame at Parliament and uncaring agents of King George III in petitions, letters, and complaints, the Declaration indicts the king himself. The way this document is organized and worded seems to be a direct response to the king's speech to Parliament the previous October. That speech possessed a preamble stating King George's right to govern the colonies, and it had a main body listing his many grievances against them. This tit-for-tat parallel between that speech and the Declaration is kind of uncanny. It is almost as if Jefferson et al. Read the King's speech and were greatly offended by it. Another parallel. The king not once addressed or responded to any of the colonists' petitions or complaints. The closest he came was actually the Proclamation of Rebellion and the October speech, but neither were addressed to the colonists. Likewise, the Declaration of Independence, despite listing all the grievances and blaming the king directly for all of them, is not addressed to him, nor anyone in England for that matter. Rather, the document is meant for the entire world, and by that, the colonial leaders really meant their fellow colonists and, fingers crossed, the courts of France and Spain. Let us now consider these complaints. I really want to focus on these today rather than the world-famous preamble, because in 1776, the main body of the Declaration was the secret sauce. This was the section that got men's blood boiling to the point where they'd lift up arms and fight. At least, that was the hope. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments, long established, should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained, and when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of the public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time, after such dissolutions, to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us, in times of peace, standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. A pause here, because there are more to come. But note, the grievances just read were blamed directly on the king alone. The following blame King George and others, and then they return to just blaming the king. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. For quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule in these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy, scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. He has also constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioner of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an indistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. Wow, that is a lot, and hard to understand what a lot of it means unless you are sitting down with a timeline of the run-up to independence and comparing the actual infractions, what I call the stations of independence, in an upcoming special episode, with these complaints. But the people of 1776 knew what these meant. Whether they felt they were true or utter hogwash is another story. These 27 complaints represent good old-fashioned colonial era propaganda. Each one has truth mixed with a proper amount of exaggeration and emotion. Now we come to the dramatic conclusion, which ends in the resolution of independence. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are of right, ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have the full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. We see here how Congress appealed to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of their intentions, not some stodgy prince from Hanover or his supplicant parliament. So clearly this missive was not intended to go straight to the king or parliament. Who was it for specifically? Right away, John Dunlap, official printer to Congress, worked through the night to set the declaration in type and printed approximately 200 copies. The Dunlap broadsides were sent to various colonial committees, assemblies, and commanders of the Continental troops. King George didn't even see a copy until months later, after General Howe sent a Dunlap broadside to London. So it wasn't a petition or appeal to London. And it wasn't a law, a legislative bill, a legal document fit for a legal proceeding. No matter what people say about it today as the foundation of our government, it actually holds no weight in any court in America. On its 250th birthday, I want to recognize the Declaration of Independence for what it really was, even if the powerful myth of what it stands for is equally important. It was propaganda of the highest order, and I might say a very effective piece. It turned, by its very reasoning, a rebellion of 13 colonies into a war of independence. Eventually, it would help the colonists convince foreign courts to accept American ambassadors, and even provide trade and support for the war. But it would take a big victory over the British Empire in the field before the colonies would receive a military alliance. Apparently, only 24 or so original Dunlap broadsides exist today. If you have not done so, please find time to travel to the National Archives in Washington, D.C. and visit the Declaration there. But if D.C. is too tough a trip for you, you can find a broadside at the Morgan Library and Museum in New York. Harvard keeps a copy at the Houghton Library. The University of Virginia holds the distinction of possessing 2 copies. Indiana University also has a copy. For me, as a Philadelphian, there's nothing quite as special as seeing it in the city that birthed it. Copies sit in Independence Hall, the Museum of the American Revolution, and the American Philosophical Society. You can do your own research and find other places to view a Dunlap. About 200 were made from July 4th to July 5th, 1776. Later that month, about 500 copies of the Holt broadside were printed. I think 3 copies of that one are held at the New York Public Library, and that might represent the majority of Holt copies that have survived to the present. So that wraps up this special episode on the Declaration of Independence. Once again, happy semi-quincentennial America. I'll be back on July 31st with my first monthly recap of the War of Independence. Until then, my friends, let freedom ring.